All right, Tabletop and Beyonders, welcome back to the Tabletop and Beyond podcast. I am your host, Justin. I'm here with co-host Jason, and we have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Thomas A. Crowell, Esquire. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey,
thanks so much. Really excited to get into the thicket of AI, copyright law, and how do we deal with this as gamers?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Our listeners will remember a couple episodes ago, we had John Sumrow on here with us who talked a little bit about his career in art. And he was kind of a mutual friend with us. He introduced us to you. And at the time we were talking about like, oh man, like how is this really impacting artists? Because gaming companies like Chaosium came out with a major statement that said, we promise to never use AI in art. And Jason and I at the time were thinking about, wow, like that seems like such a strong blanket statement that may work for them because they've got an art budget, but what about the little guys or something like that? And so we knew we wanted to talk about AI in art. We knew we wanted to talk about AI in art in tabletop RPGs in the gaming industry. Yeah. And it just so happens that Thomas, you are our expert for this because 1, you're a gamer, 2, you're a lawyer, and 3, this is like your wheelhouse with this stuff. So we're very excited to have you on the show to talk about all that today.
Thank you.
Yeah, but of course, before we get into anything, let's talk about our Geek Week. Jason, how was your Geek Week?
It's been a good week, man. It's been a crazy one, but I am making progress on my my Askergon. How do you say it? Askergon vampires, right? For my Warcry band. So I played, Flesh Eater Courts when it first came out. I played Ogres heavily all the way through several tournaments up through Adepticon. And now I'm decided I want to play something a little bit different, something that's not big smashing and kind of flying all over the table. So this one's going to have to make me think a little bit more. So I'm forcing myself into new warband. But first, I got to get them painted so they'll actually roll well on the tabletop.
That's how it works every time.
Yep. So I've got my paint scheme and I've started I did my first guide to completion. I liked it. And now I'm batching them. So hopefully in the next episode or so, I'll show some pictures and we'll see them after I get the batch painting done on them.
Awesome.
That's on my table.
Nice. Thomas, how was your Geek Week, sir?
Oh, I hit a number of the classic geek areas. I represent comic book creators in addition to filmmakers. I'm also a copyright attorney, law professor. But the thing I love doing the most is working with my geeky clients because you kind of get the inside track. So this week I was able to read a soon-to-be published graphic novel by one of my clients. And on the personal side, prepping for the boost up to level 6 of my Goliath Barbarian. So very excited. Next week, nice. We're back in our regular monthly D&D game that was been going on now for 12 years without missing a month. So, wait.
12 years and you're still on level 6.
Well, different campaigns. Okay. We got up to level 18 and then we redid it and we did a different thing. I ran a Call of Cthulhu.
Wow, you are slow rolling.
Now, cool. Do you guys play homebrew stuff, or you run like adventures out of the books?
It depends on who's in the hot seat, right? So for the longest, our longest campaign was about 7 years long, and that was all homebrewed, and it just went over the map. Now we're playing something from a module. The name of the module is hidden, so we can't go and do research. When I do it, and I play Call of Cthulhu a lot, and this was the sort of John Sumrow connection. John was actually the first person to walk me through Call of Cthulhu. I loved it so much that I've been DMing, or I should say game mastering, keepering.
You're the keeper.
Keepering. I'm the keeper of the Call of Cthulhu game. And last week, this is the last thing I'll say, but I'm so excited of having done this. I was able to manifest a dream I've had since childhood, since I first saw Star Wars on the silver screen. I did a mashup using Star Trek, the Modiphius Star Trek game, of some of the Cthulhu elements of Star Trek old school, got them through the Guardian of Forever, all the way to an alternate universe of Star Wars. So yes, I have now made in my gaming group the mashup of Star Trek and Star Wars. 14-year-old me would be so excited.
Dude, that's like mixing Pepsi and RC Cola into the
I know. Yeah, just better have a camera ready when it all comes up, I suppose.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love some Call of Cthulhu, and there's just so many great adventures that are written. Like, you can play them as one shots, or you could run the, like the Mask of I always mispronounce this, Nyarlathotep, So
you always know when someone is saying it because they always do the Nila, that one.
And then we had Mike Mason on the show, right? Yeah, we had Mike Mason on the show, and he's like, "Oh, Nyarlathotep," and I'm like, "Yeah, exactly that."
Yeah.
So that's great. That's great. Well, it sounds like a pretty good geeky week for you. I spent some of my time painting some miniatures, but I also spent a good chunk of time playing Diablo 4 with my daughter, which has been great. We've been working through. She decided she didn't like her character, so she started over with another one, and so I sort of started over with another one with her, and so we're just exploring the world again.
And you're not going to join the Whoopi Goldberg class action suit against Diablo. No,
since I have an Xbox, I'm totally fine. All she needs to do is just go get an Xbox. Right. Come on, Whoopi, you can afford it. So yeah, it's kind of funny. That's basically my geek week. It was good. It was just focused on some of that stuff. So good times there. But yeah. Oh, one thing I did want to talk about, and I'm probably going to drop my background so our viewers will get a good shot at my hobby setup back there behind me. So that's where all the painting. Ooh, mirrored. I can't do this. That's where all the painting
behind your head.
There it is. There it is.
Go.
In fact, you can see right there. That's where all of my veteran guardsmen are being painted, and up here is my entire not my entire, but a majority of my pile of shame that just stares at me and mocks me for not painting.
Your horns of Hashut are still up there.
Yes, they are.
Yes.
And the Chaos Legionnaires, and
all those guys.
Sylvaneth, and it's bad. But I wanted to take this off because upside down. Okay, so I got this in the mail the other day from Chaosium. It's the Pendragon starter set.
Yep.
This is not on the market yet. It doesn't come out on the market until September. So
special.
we got a review copy that we will test out here in hopefully the next couple of weeks, and maybe do a little show on it. But Pendragon, if you guys are not familiar, it is the King Arthur's Court, Camelot, the Knights of the Round Table. This starter box is a true Chaosium starter box, because I want to tell you what's inside this box. One, the Adventure of the Sword in the Stone. Okay. And it's basically a solo adventure that you get to play. Okay. And then you've got some rules and core mechanics. And then you have the Sword Campaign, which is a beginner-friendly campaign taking the player knights through the most important early events of King Arthur's reign. And it sounds like there's 3 adventures in that you get to walk through. And it comes with, I don't know if maybe I'll hold it up tight, but right here, you see all of the stuff that comes in the box. There's the adventure rule books and stuff like that, but tons of handouts, little cards, dice, all that kind of stuff. It's not as hefty as the RuneQuest one, because the RuneQuest had all those folios for the characters and stuff like that. But it is packed with great stuff, and it looks like it's going to be awesome. So if you are ever interested in being chivalrous knights in medieval times, then and not the restaurant, but in the olden times, then keep an eye out, because I think pre-orders are up for this Pendragon starter set, and I think they come out in September. So
there was plenty of non-chivalrous activity in that time period too, though. So
something
for everyone.
But you're part of the round table, so you need to be chivalrous.
There was plenty of non-chivalrous stuff as part of the round table too.
Yeah, but you're supposed to be chivalrous.
Come on. Yeah.
So but I'm excited to try that out. It's going to be interesting.
All I can think of is
Thank you.
Excalibur. I'm gonna have to go watch Excalibur again, like the 1970s.
Yeah.
King Arthur story.
With Patrick Stewart with hair. Patrick Stewart has hair in that movie. I can't watch it.
Well, that's right. You're like, this isn't Professor Xavier. But what was it? There was also the one. It was called, I think, First Night with Sean Connery and Richard Gere.
Yeah. Okay. There's been several.
Yeah, and
Arthur
he was like Sean Connery was King Arthur and Richard Gere was Lancelot, I think, and there was another lady that was Guinevere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
good stuff. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, excited about that. But let's get to our main topic tonight, which is, again, talking about AI in art, AI in tabletop games, the gaming industry. Does it have a place? Does it not have a place? What are the legal ramifications behind all of these types of things? And as we said before, Thomas, you are our, eye in the sky, basically. You're the guy that I think is going to walk us through this. But why don't you give us a little bit more about yourself? Talk about yourself a little bit, and why are you uniquely positioned for this moment in gaming history, I think?
Sure. So let me start off. I'll give you a brief overview, and then I'm going to sort of punch into some slides that I have, just a little bit of background that might contextualize things. But as I said at the top of the show, I'm a lawyer. I'm a copyright law professor. But perhaps more interesting for this topic is, before I turned to the dark side and took the bar exam, I was a science reporter. I was a science TV reporter, and one of the stories I was covering quite in detail in the 90s, I am that old, was this nascent industry of AI that was really, AI has been, as a field, goes back to the 1950s and computer AI, but the 90s is when it was really starting to sort of become something that could be real. And I remember going to sit down with some scientists at IBM and having them talk to me about what this new world of AI was going to be. And it rocked my world. The fact that we'd be creating images, that we'd have computers that could research things and think like brains with neural networks. I then went to law school, and I asked my copyright professor, who was a well-known professor, well-known, arguably one of the biggest experts in copyright law in the country, about AI. I was fresh off the heels of, wow, this AI thing. And he sort of gave me this response of, why do we need to worry about that? That's not here. And I remember thinking, gosh, this is sort of my first experience with the law being over here and tech being over here, and realizing that there's a little bit of catch up. Now, I want to say, sort of in defense of my professor, he was actually right. One of the things that is misreported now is how misaligned copyright law is. I came in thinking, well, gosh, you guys need to wake up and listen. He showed me back in the 1960s, Congress was considering the implications of machine-generated artwork. So at the outset, I want to say this is not an issue of that is new. Right? It is something that copyright has been dealing with, or at least anticipating, for a while. Let me punch in, if I may, a couple of slides, just to sort of get that part up before we get to the nitty gritty, because I feel the law professor in me starting to come out and starting to talk about copyright. But I want to just sort of put a couple of things on the board before we do. So I'm going to click present if I can, and I'm going to share my screen right now. And one of the first things, arguably the thing that I am the proudest of, is this. I was actually a cultist in the Cults of Cthulhu book that was illustrated in part by John Sumrow. So thank you, John, but that's me on the right. I am a cult leader. So I just had to get that out, because that really is the highlight.
You on the left? Behind the mask?
Ooh, that's with the mask. So a couple of things. If anybody wants more info on this, there's my URL, thomascrowell.com. And if you want another sort of approach, those of you out there who are filmmakers who want to know how to use AI and how to avoid some of the pitfalls in your filmmaking, I'm doing a lecture on July 13th on stage32.com about AI. Those of you who are attorneys and who want CLE, that's continuing legal education credits, on comic book law and AI is going to be the big topic that we're addressing this year at New York Comic Con. We've been doing series of lectures every year for attorneys, basically training them how to work in the geek sphere. And AI is now absolutely front and center in what we're going to be talking about. So you can go to New York.
It's interesting to me that that you think like, oh, I'm going to create like an RPG, or I'm going to create my own comic or something like that, and you don't necessarily think that you need a lawyer for that, right? And I think that became super clear when Sumro was on the podcast with us, and he was like, hey, I'm talking about my lawyer. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I realized that, like just like any other industry, like if you're in it and you need to protect yourself, like you need a good lawyer, right? So even comic book guys need lawyers.
Which is why, and thank you for teeing that up, I actually wrote the very first legal guide for the comic book industry, The Pocket Lawyer for Comic Book Creators, available where fine books are sold, including on Amazon.com. And for you filmmakers there, I have The Pocket Lawyer for Filmmakers, also Amazon.com, or where fine legal books are sold. Phew, okay, I'm done with my self-promotional stuff. Always have to get that in front and center.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's great for our listeners if you are interested. He mentioned that your next lecture is a webinar, so you don't need to be in the New York area. You don't need to be, it's online. You can join them. I think I saw there's a promotion right now for it's $32, right, to jump in there and listen to some of this. I think it's really, really interesting stuff. So yeah,
thank you.
No problem.
So I'm ready to get into the legal stuff. I could talk more about me, but I don't think that's what people want to hear. So I'm ready to do. I hand present back to you. You can grab it.
Yeah.
I'm done for now.
Okay, so let's talk about like I think we need a little bit of a foundation.
Yeah.
And I think some of that foundation comes in like copyright law. So like what is copyright law at its heart? I think a lot of people, as you mentioned before the show, some people think that copyright law is like trademark law,
right? Which,
I mean, there's probably like a Venn diagram of stuff that, with copyrights and trademarks, but it's not necessarily this one and the same. And I think if we have an understanding of what that is, maybe that'll help us understand like our later conversation about like why AI in art matters.
Sure. So I think the first thing we have to understand about copyright law, especially here in the U.S., is that it is one of the rights that's absolutely included in the body of the Constitution. So we didn't even wait for the Bill of Rights. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, which enumerates the powers that Congress has, it gives us a direct, hey, Congress, you can make laws about copyright and patent. And it gives us more than just the express sort of mandate of Congress. It gives us the rationale. Now, why I slow down and lean into that is because every time you have a court case that's adjudicating something that has to do with constitutional law, one of the things a court does is it goes, okay, well, why do we have this? What is the constitutional purpose this law is trying to enshrine? And here in the Constitution, it's pretty direct. It says that we're granting you these powers for authors and inventors, the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries for a limited time. And what this means is authors, copyright owners, inventors, patent owners potentially, have these monopolistic rights in their creations. And then it's up to you, Congress, to figure out what that means. And so the history of copyright law in this country started with the U.S. Constitution. If we want to go really back and polish off our history books, it started in the late 16 teens, or rather the 1700s, with Queen Anne and in England with Statute of Anne. So it's a long law. It's an old law, and it's one that's changed literally many times over the course of our history. The reason to start there is that you have to recognize that it's a series of accretion of rights. The first right we had under copyright law was the right to protect others against copying our books, essentially. Didn't say anything about public performance. If I wrote a play and you wanted to put on the play, I couldn't stop you early on in copyright law. And it was only through a series of changes and recognizing the technological shifts. So when photography came in, this is really relevant to the history of AI. When photography came in, it kind of broke the thinking, because, okay, we get what it means to protect a work of an artist, to protect the work of a painter or a writer, because these are works that were produced by humans doing a thing. But a camera, that's just showing us what reality is. Why should that be protected under copyright? And that's really the first time that courts in the US had to deal with this notion of the sort of the abstract level of what it is in authorship that is protected beyond just the product of our work. How can a machine create something that is copyrightable? Because we all know photographs can be copyrightable. And the court came out with some very interesting reasoning, and I'll sort of stop speaking and get out of law professor mode and take some questions. But the reasoning that it arrived at is key for understanding what we can protect under AI law. It said, look, the photographer selected where the objects were going to be. The photographer arranged them and coordinated all those aspects in front of the camera. So in a real sense, the authorship of a photograph is in the placement of the camera, the placement of the lights, the arrangement of the subject. It is not in you necessarily having to put pen to paper. It's not in you writing or describing. It's in your collection, selection, and arrangement, which is why I can take works from 19th century advertisements that are no longer under copyright, put them together in a collage, and your argument, dude, those are not protected by copyright. Each of those are individually not protectable. I can make the argument that the collection, the selection, and arrangement of everything I did in the collage has its own copyright. So I'm going to pause there, because I think you can start to see how this may impact the results that we get from the AI algorithms. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of foundation. Copyright protects works of expression that are embodied in a tangible medium. It does not protect ideas. It does not protect our likeness. It does not protect a brand name. Mm-hmm. The brand names, trademark, likeness, rights of publicity. Copyright is for works of expression. And there's a lot of confusion about what that means when it comes to AI, because people sort of see it as hey, this is art that's under attack, as opposed to a more, I think, nuanced copyright law argument that is being had.
Yeah. So question for you on this then, and going back to your example of the photograph, right? When the photo, because a lot of our evolution of law deals with, we kind of create legislation around the circumstances that we're in, and maybe a little bit looking into the future, but just a couple steps ahead. And it's not till something major. It's not till something major evolution kind of jumps in, and then we actually have to respond to that, and we go back and revisit. Do you think that maybe the photograph was a big jumping point for us, and do we have legislation that covers us far enough in advance to kind of cover the AI right now? Are we trying to kind of interpret and apply current understanding to something that's in front of us that we don't quite have our grasp on right now? What are your thoughts on that?
So this AI is impacting copyright law structures all around the world. So it's not wrong to say that each country is dealing with it in its own way, and there's some omnibus legislation that's being proposed in different places. That being said, the structure of our copyright law currently deals with, I think adequately, many of the AI issues. I say many, not all, because the other thing that's sort of happening in the news is there are several issues that are being conflated together into one big issue, and there's a lot of nuance that's just being lost. So
that never happens in the news.
Yeah. So
I know what you're talking about. I've never seen
this. So the simplest thing that copyright can deal with, U.S. copyright law can deal with whether or not something is substantially similar to a work that is under copyright and protect that work that's under copyright. So if you punch in a prompt into AI and it spits out Spider-Man looking, creation, copyright would know how to deal with that and say, hey, you don't have the copyright to that. It's substantially similar to Spider-Man. But what it doesn't really know how to deal with, because of some of the case law dealing with the internet, is the issue of how the data was sourced. Right now, I don't want to get too far afield if we want to lay down how AI works, but it's the data aggregation and where those sources came from. Arguably, and people have argued this, also infringe the copyright when you tell bots to go online, find published images, collect it in a database, and to train AIs to make images. So that's a separate image, though. It's a separate issue than what happens when it comes out of your app, right? There's two very different issues. And then the third issue, which I hate to say, it's not really a legal issue, it's a normative one, is the displacement of artists. So from a copyright perspective, there are issues, but the issues of economics and economic displacement and marginalization of creators, or I would argue continued economic marginalization of creators, imposes a different set of structures, which quite frankly, that's not a copyright issue. I mean, I can speak to it, but when people talk about artists are being hurt, copyright law, come to my rescue, that's not really the domain of copyright law. To say, hey, artists, you can preserve this area that you had a monopoly to creating images. Now a computer can come in and do it. That's, deciding the economic fairness or unfairness of that is not a copyright issue.
Yeah,
I think I thank you so much for breaking that out into three different issues, because I don't think that is something that is widely understood.
Right.
I told you earlier, before the show, that I just read a whole big long white paper on generative AI, and the two copyright issues that you were talking about, right, which is the output of the generative AI. That's one function where you can absolutely, like you said, compare and contrast and see, is this too similar to other copyrighted material? Super easy. And I actually don't know that, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't know that a lot of people are arguing with or arguing that we need more copyright law around the output of the AI. It seems to be more focused around the input, which is that these AI source scrapers are getting copyrighted material, licensed material, all of that type of stuff, and scraping it into their, into the bots, and then they're getting trained on it, and then they're able to, do similar techniques to recreate pieces that aren't similar to the things that they did, but it's trained it enough that it can become a rightful artist in its own right, type of thing. And so it seems like the real the people who are really serious about copyright and AI and art are more focused on the input rather than the output. And maybe I'm wrong about that.
So I do see a lot of heat on the output in certainly my feed and the people I represent, because I represent a lot of comic book artists, people who draw from Marvel and DC and their own work, and game designers and game artists. And there's a lot of, I would say, confusion. I mean, Justin, I think you're absolutely right in terms of how you're analyzing it, that the correctness of how we're looking at it doesn't always percolate down to the level of anger of artists, right? And one of the things I hear a lot is this, hey, the AI has taken my copyrighted style. And I want to pause there. Copyrighted style. That's not a correct statement of the law. There's no copyright in a style. So when you sort of start with that premise that I've developed a style and it is mine and no one else can use this style, unfortunately, that's from a legal perspective, that's not a protectable thing under copyright. And it's not really protectable in other ways too, unless it is unless you're talking about a very specific design of a container that is being used in a trademark form. But again, that's not what we're talking about. So a lot of the confusion and the heat and the anger is coming, in my view, from a misunderstanding of copyright law rather than, there is a lot of accurate anger, but there's also a lot of misplaced anger.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the initial reaction, I follow a lot of indie game designers, and obviously they have, they're scrapping for cash, right? And they're trying to make ends meet, and they're trying to keep the lights on. But they're also working alongside artists that are scrapped for cash, that are all those things, right? And I've seen a lot of them kind of respond to, I think, the second and the third thing you said, which is, number one, looking at, this could displace us from our career choice or our field choice from an artist perspective, which I think, we'll get a little bit further if that's, like you said, a real thing or not. But also if it's consuming all of this data, and then very easily able to pop out something that it has a style, like you said, style representing something, is that violating art? And when they first, or not art, but violating the copyright, when they first started to make those arguments so fast, like, oh, it's consuming all of these works of art and it's just popping something out, it's not fair, and those things, I think a lot about, when a lot of these artists are making their own work, they pull up an inspiration board, and right next to them they'll put all of their favorite artists and their songs and their music and all of these other people's copyrighted work right next to them for inspiration. And so kind of the thought was like, what really is the difference between the wet works up in a human's brain training your own self on other people's work versus an algorithm training itself on other people's work to produce something as well? What are your thoughts?
I think there's a key difference, and that's processing time. And it's such a small thing, right? An AI will spit out a wonderful design or series of designs that you can then choose from within 10 seconds that might take an artist an entire day to do. And the accretion of that, you could see the logarithmic progression if that's the model that's adopted, because you have this sort of John Henry issue of the, man with the hammer trying to outrun the steam train. So in a very real, again, economic sense, as opposed to a copyright sense, the just that speed, is, if it's not pushed back against effectively or constrained, it will displace a lot of artists, and has already. And I also want to say too that, yes, I'm speaking very much with my law professor hat on here, not legal advice, law professor hat, but my background before all that, I have a BFA. I was a film and TV guy. I've been an actor. I've been a graphic designer. So it's not lost on me, the passion and the anger that the artists feel.
Absolutely.
And I just have to be very careful. Like, if you're asking me from a copyright perspective, I'm going to take off the artist anger hat and put on the copyright hat. And I'm going to answer it like that, because until artists, and I'm sorry, artists, I am talking to you. I've taught our school for years. You got to listen. You got to get the copyright law under your belt so you know where you can push back against if that's what you want to do. Because when you make an argument that says you can copyright style or you can copyright an idea, people on the other side are not going to hear it, because they're going to dismiss everything you say after that. So it's just, I think it's important for artists, if you want to fight against this, to get the knowledge of how it actually works.
Yeah. And I'll just follow up with, I think I'm an engineer. I've talked about that on this podcast here or there. So I look for innovation. I look for the steps ahead. I look for the evolution. My wife thinks that I'm going to bring the destruction of the world in 5 to 10 years.
That's why he has the Terminator stuff there behind him.
Yeah, but I'm the one wiring them up. No, but
and I'm neutral.
Yeah.
As you can see, I'm the perfect attorney, neutral, right? True neutral.
But at the same time, like, there is absolutely still in me an appreciation for a human created thing, right? Like, if somebody gives me a wooden spoon and they say, "Here you go, I bought this for $1.50," at Bed Bath and Beyond, and you can stir in your pot with it, and then someone else gives me a wooden spoon and says, "I carved this," it's going to have way more appreciation in my heart for it, right? I think there's still that, oh, wow, like the investment and the understanding that, and the amount of, calories and computational power just inside your body that you had to do to come up with this talent and develop the skill. That's not lost in our culture, right? And I think we're coming to a crossroads where maybe people are afraid that we're going to lose some of our culture if it becomes so, diluted and widespread in the ability to create like these awesome work and things there. So that I kind of jumping around in our questions, but kind of curious on what your thoughts are on what this could do for our culture in terms of accessibility, because you have these people that maybe have never been able to bring what's in their dreams, in their heads out because they haven't had the talent, or their career path or their life hasn't allowed them to develop that talent. Now they have a way to express themselves. Is that a positive thing, or is it going to start to kind of, put too much water into the milk so that it just gets watered down? What are your thoughts?
So first of all, I love the question because there's a lot in there that I want to sort of tease out, because there's a lot there. From the perspective of where AI is right this moment, when we are talking in June of 2023, AI and the way the model works, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but there's a probabilistic, there's a randomness that's built into generative AI that you're never going to get to the point where you can, using this tech, to punch in exactly what you want to see and have it come out. And I think that's relevant both from a copyright perspective, but also from a, hey, I want to be able to express what I see and hear. Because in a very real sense, the AI that we're using now, 2023, is going to do its own thing, right? It's going to take some of your words. You don't know how it's going to mix them up. You don't know how it's going to combine them to make a whole. It'll just give you something that's going to look pretty or weird or pretty weird. And copyright law recognizes that, and that's kind of one of the reasons why it doesn't award copyright to the product of what comes out of the algorithm. But as I said, there's this other side of, well, does this open up new economic line? Even at its best, let's say AI now goes to, you can tweak it however you want. Does this help artists? Does this help people who are marginalized economically suddenly have more resources, more ways to get their word out? I would say there's a flip side to this coin, and I actually approach it from, I think 180 degrees differently, quite frankly, is that there are a lot of economically marginalized artists right now who all they can afford are a paintbrush or canvas, or they have a computer and they can write something, and they're using their own talents, not through AI. Those people are going to be quickly shunted aside when you have somebody, who's just going bit, Mario, only it's the Incredible Hulk and it's Star Trek 2. Or what, and then whatever comes out of that is may look better, more professional than the guy who's living in a semi-wide trailer. All he can do is paint, So I think there's, I don't think it's as easy as, hey, if we stop AI, these marginalized people won't have means. I think it's actually, the more we enable AI, the people who could not compete effectively, but for these sort of inexpensive resources, will now have no means to compete, or fewer means to compete.
I really liked what the kind of analogy that you made earlier, which is, John Henry versus the steam machine, and because there's a reason that story sticks around in our lore, in our cultural lore right now, because it fits so many different things that we have done. When the internet first came out, it was, John Henry and this, and the steam machine, but because now we've got the internet versus, like writing letters and actually
and Photoshop.
Exactly. And I mean, and I think this is just one of those next iteration of tools. Now, I do think that these generative AIs have a lot of potential that we aren't even keen to understanding right now, right? We're in like the toddler stage of these generative AIs, and I think one important point that you made is, you throw your words in there and it kind of just randomly does something. If you throw your words in there again, it's going to be completely different, even if you put it in the same order. If I put Mario, Incredible Hulk, Star Wars, and Jason did it and you did it, we would get 3 very different things. And that's just the nature of the beast that it is. And it's so there's AI right now, generative AI right now doesn't have consistency. It doesn't have consistent quality as well, that you can kind of rely on, I think, to be really monetized. Now, I think that there's some people that are finding creative ways they find that pretty weird type of stuff, and they're like, oh, cool, I'm gonna monetize this, you know what I mean, or put something out here. And so I think there's opportunities there, like you said. But I do feel like right now a lot of the feeling is this John Henry versus the Steam Machine, and I think that that society always likes to root for the human in that case. You know what I mean? Because we identify with John Henry, like the person that's like fighting against the odds, and so from a moral perspective, I think that the tabletop community, the tabletop gaming community, is rooting for the artist, the starving artist, right? They're pulling for him because they don't want that to go away. They don't want to see these people suffer. But at the same time, like, I don't think that the machine's going away either. You know what I mean? Like the machine was here to stay. So that brings up some interesting things. So now, with that in mind, you have our John Henry artists that are out there creating art, right? You have the Steam Machine that's out there creating art. Both of them are cranking things out. I will look at what Sumro does and be like, dude, that is amazing. Like, I love it. I love that cultist on the right. Like, he's a handsome fella, And then also, Jason will throw an AI generated art piece that he saw online at me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Like, look at that expanse. Like, the diorama there is just like crazy. Like, it's so good, And I'm sitting here looking at both of them being like, I love both of them for what they are. I love both that I'm, that I'm seeing. So if art is intended to like provoke, an emotion or suck you in, if we're, if we see that does that on the human side, but it also does it on the AI side, like, is there really a difference in art at that point, do you think?
So taking off the copyright hat, putting on the artist hat, right? Because it's a different set of structures that we are looking at when we're talking about, is it art versus is it protectable, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So just on that front, and this is really because we're in the realm of art, a lot of it is opinion, personal opinion, as opposed to case law. My own view, I have and I recognize it may be in the minority, by the way, is I have an issue with artists creating art without an intent. So in other words, if you just slap some things together and I'm looking at you, Jackson Pollock. I hate Jackson Pollock. I know you're going to get a lot of hatred for that, but abstract expressionism is lost on me. Sorry.
Me too.
Sorry if I offended people. But to me, there's a difference between a Maxfield Parrish, who's going to create these very AI looking, paintings, but who has a very specific intent. Maxfield Parrish would draw things along the golden mean. It was very specific. Pulling from the past as he was adding some of the applied art of the early 20th century on top. So there were specific things he was trying to evoke, as opposed to just, hey man, it's what you mean, man. And the issue I have with, if you're doing AI art and you punch in, whatever, and it comes out with this beautiful thing that you didn't intend because you just punched in Mario, Incredible Hulk and Star Trek, which of course all three of us are now going to go and do at the end of this podcast.
I've already done it.
Yeah. It doesn't, to me, it lacks the intent. Again, not copyright law, I'm talking about art. And so if you're just throwing something up and saying, let the machine do the thing, and it is what it is, it's pretty, right? To me, that's not art. You have to have a continuation from artist through end product. And again, I know I'm speaking more from opinion here rather than when I'm talking about copyright law where I can point to a case or a statute. So yeah, you can disagree with me and you're not going to be wrong. It's just that's my take and what I like to see when I call something art.
So then what are your thoughts then with tools like Midjourney, where you can punch in a prompt, and it gives you something that maybe is not a perfectly what you had in your head, and you can continue to refine it as you neck down, and you get closer and closer to what you had emotionally, until you find something that is what I was trying to portray.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not, if I put my pen to it, it wouldn't look the same, but it's captured what I was feeling now. Now I'm ready to stop, refining and refining and refining. What is that then? Is that art because you've expressed an intent to pull a thought or a
I think so. I think so. I think it's, and again, not talking about the copyright perspective, just staying on the art, right? We're with our berets on, our little French berets. I think yes, and I think it does get closer to what we've all been talking about, using it as a tool because it's effectuating our vision. Mm. What it lacks, though, is the talent of creating it. But here's where that argument of saying, "Oh, you need talent," that's going to fall by the wayside the minute you look at how Warhol created his pictures. Hey, how Leonardo did, how most of the Renaissance artists did. Most of the paintings that we see, that we think of when we think of famous Renaissance era paintings, may not have been painted by that famous artist. Many of them had their own shops, like Andy Warhol did, and they were like, "Great, here's the sketch. Okay, you do this part. You do this part. You're good at hands. Unlike an AI, you do this part." And so it's not the case that the history of art has been the history of auteurs. It's just not. So that I suggest people who start with that may need to go back to art school and learn a little bit of art history. Because
I'd even pull on that a little bit further and say, if you think back to the photography aspect of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like those people who initially started to create, things that were capturing moments. They didn't create the mechanisms. They didn't create the film. They didn't, all those things. In fact, today, many people consider themselves artists with their smartphone, and they know nothing about or deal with the technology that created that. But they're using that technology to refine and put filters on and kind of tweak the output of that. And I think it's important to recognize that tools are a part of creating art, right?
Yes.
And AI. The reality is some really smart group of people sat down and put thousands of hours into developing an algorithm that can produce something, right? I think a lot of the concern that I hear is people like, okay, but now many people can use that tool. Like if let's step back and say we have an alternate history. Someone created an algorithm and they never shared it. And they started producing this art saying, I wrote this, 3,000 lines of code algorithm that I spent 10 years of my life and my doctorate working on that can produce these images, and he keeps it all to himself. Can't you argue that he has developed the talent and the ability to produce that work?
Well, copyright law has been historically. Yeah. I mean, I guess. Are you asking me as the artist, or you asking me as the copyright guy? It depends upon the answer, but I would say certainly starting with the copyright perspective, you must have a human who is at least doing the collection, the selection, the arrangement, right? That's U.S. copyright law. Okay. It's about as black letter law as you can get because of that case that I was talking to you about, which incidentally, a little bit of an aside, but it's kind of cool, is that case, Burrow Giles v. Serenay, I'll pull it up, involved a photograph of Oscar Wilde. So in a very real sense, I love this as a geek and a history buff. I love the fact that Oscar Wilde in some way, shape, or form is still influencing how we're creating art in 2023. So it's awesome. Strange bedfellows indeed. As an artist, answering your question, I would say that however I can get my image that's in my head out, that's what I want. I think that most artists feel that way, and there is certainly a sense of pride of I can put pen to paper. The thing that I see most in my feed is artists rebutting the AI creators by saying, hey, if you want to do this, you should go to art school. If you want to do this, you should put pen to paper and put some, your butt in the seat and work hard the way I did. And it's, and I get that. I get that anger, especially if you're protecting an economic sort of strata that you live in that has always been under attack, right? It's not as if artists are billionaires, right? No one thinks that artists are the rich people. Right. So again, I get the anger, but it's not. but I think there's a lot to be said about AI being a tool, but also not generating something that may be protectable by copyright. It seems like I'm arguing two different points, and perhaps I am, but copyright all comes back to this goal, right? This rationale that I was talking about at the top of the show of incentivizing people to create more work. That's it. That's why we have copyright law, is we award a limited monopoly to your work, which is subject, by the way, before even AI raised its head, to things like fair use, de minimis use. There's a lot of things that you could do with somebody's copyright, notwithstanding the fact that they have a monopoly on it without their permission. But it's there to incentivize artists to create more. And so if that is the rationale, which it is the rationale, then having AI receive protection doesn't follow that rationale, unless there's a human involved that's taking it and then doing something further with it. So in a nutshell, that's why copyright law sort of balks at, no matter how much you think that your input prompt, if it's not quite what you're getting, then there's a break there in what copyright law wants to recognize. But Jason, to your point, the better the tools get, the more you're allowed to, sort of step in these interim phases and say, make the neck shorter and make the eyes bluer and, add wings, and it will listen and not just do some weird 10-fingered version of that. Then I think we are getting closer to the type of tool that copyright would recognize is furthering an artist's trade.
Yeah, I think you answered the question that I had primed and ready for you, which is,
I'm so sorry. I'll forget I said everything I just said.
We'll just rewind 10 minutes and then start
just
again.
Delete it. Just delete it.
No, the question I had primed was, do you see a point in the future, maybe distant or, near or distant future, where the AI generated art, the outputs that these, generative AI tools put out would be copyrightable? Yeah, and it's funny because there's and I encourage everybody, and I can send you a link when we're done with this if you want to put it on the online. But there's a great white paper, opinion paper written by the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, that goes beyond just trademark applications and patent applications, but into the copyright, and it gives a really nice analysis of this question. And I think a lot of the details of the answer I'm about to give are there. But I do think that the more we have those controls over it, the less it becomes the product of a computer's mind, and more a product of the artist's mind. And it becomes something like Photoshop, although a little asterisk there with Photoshop's AI tools of, just block out the section, say add a pretty scene, and it will do that. That may actually be pulling back a little bit from what would allow for protection. So I think Adobe may have jumped the gun a little bit with its introduction of some of the AI tools, because they're not as tweakable, quite frankly, as some of the Mid-Journey stuff that you see.
Yeah, a word. Go ahead, Justin.
Oh no, I was just going to say that's really interesting. The thought that I had, and I may be off about this, but there's a couple of steps in the process where the artist could insert themselves to in generating AI art, right? The one that we've been talking about is the person that's sitting in front of the computer, sitting in front of the prompt, writing, saying like, okay, I want, Mario, Incredible Hulk, Star Trek. Oh, no, I want a blue uniform instead of red uniform because red uniforms always die. I want, and you start tweaking that. That's that one user that's using the front end of the tool, right? Now, there can be extra human interaction on the back end of the tool when you're actually training the generative AI, and that is the human is curating what kinds of data sets are going into it to pull from, right? So they may be saying like, okay, I want all non-copyrightable, or non-copyrighted works of art to go in here. So maybe all, old works of art, stuff that's,
public domain,
whose copyrights have expired, etc. It may say like anything that's free commercial copyright use that's on the internet right now. I want to pull that in. And then, that human can also say, okay, I don't want vector files because that's just stupid. I want, I do want these types of files. So does that have a impact on whether or not AI art would be copyrightable in the future if that human is inserting themselves on like what kind of inspiration that generative AI is going to be pulling from and what it's going to train itself on?
So I think you've identified something that could be a problem in the future for copyright.
Okay.
Yeah,
Future problem identifier.
Because that certainly in my mind it creates so we have sort of, let's posit two artists, if you will, or two people, and then there's the AI algorithm in between. The one, as you said, who's helping feed the data in, and they select, they collect, they arrange the data in, and then there's the one at the end who's entering the prompts and say, do something with only that data, right? We're just going to restrict our hypo to just that data, and then the algorithm. The minute the algorithm jumps in, it's going to do something random. It's going to do something random because that's how the tech works. And copyright law does not like non-human randomization that just comes in and changes things. Now, you may push back and say, what about Jackson Pollock? I mean, there are things that that we can think of and go, well, really, copyright law? What about that? What about that? And I have to say, there are some things that we all accept as art, which, it's art, man. Don't ask that question too deeply. There is some sort of a penumbra of uncertainty there, but it is now going to be very clear because everyone is lining up on one side of this divide and the other. And certainly right now, the copyright, I would say the overwhelming weight of copyright experts in the Copyright Office and Congress and all the industry leaders are sort of, with the exception of the tech leaders, I want to be very clear on that, are kind of lining up with this understanding that there needs to be a human as part of how it creates what it creates. It's not enough just to say, here are the ingredients, go randomize it as you will in accordance with the prompt. But the problem it creates is, let's say you now have a much more streamlined system where it's data in and you as a curator adding the data in can affect how it's modeled, how it's used. Use Caravaggio's lighting, but not his sense of color. Use, a cubist sense of geometry, but not Maxfield Parrish's. And at some point, you may be as a data selector in that sense, you may be interjecting enough input that if the AI randomness is reduced, then there may be a situation where the prompt writer and the AI feeder, the data feeder, are both contributing something that copyright law would typically see as copyrightable work. But without going into too far afield of joint authorship issues, it would still under the current law break down, but it would create a mess. It would. So I think right now the legislation is aimed at trying to prevent those messes and trying to figure out, okay, are we going to have this clear rule of nothing that goes into the AI is going to count as copyrightability, so no tech companies having co-copyright ownership with the prompt creators, which is something that people are trying to avoid. But I'm not sure that we'd ever quite get to that copyright ownership from somebody feeding in a prompt to a random machine, but it would definitely color the waters a lot.
That's super, super interesting to me because, I'm looking at it from these two sides and I can absolutely see the mess, the train wreck that's in the future. And hopefully there's folks looking that are smarter than me at that, so yeah.
The thing I would love if there were tech company people listening is just to be a little bit more honest about it, because it's starting to feel like the tech companies are banging this gong that anybody can be creator, and the reality of the copyright uncertainty means that you could be using your AI software to spend a lot of time, a lot of hours putting something together, only to find out that you don't own it, or rather you don't own a copyright to it. Anybody can use it, or even worse is that you think you own it. No one disabuses you of that notion. You sell it to a publisher. You license it to a publisher and then boom, you are now answering their lawyer's phone calls. Why don't they have a copyright in the thing you promised there was a copyright into? So right now, I think some of the tech companies are being a little bit too rose-colored glasses, and they really need to address this copyright issue, because artists make work for money, and that money comes from the leverage of having a copyright to trade. So if AI is not going to generate a copyright without a lot of post work, the tech companies, I think, have an obligation to let artists know that.
So I want to pull on what you just said there. You said a lot of post work, right?
Yeah.
So because there are a couple words that you've been using kind of consistently throughout our discussion today that I want to pull on. One of them is arrangement, right? Whether humans are arranging it versus, algorithms arranging. Another one is randomized, those two things. The first thing I want to point out, as someone who works not in this tech industry, but in the tech industry, it implies various levels of AI and ML, which usually gets tacked on to AI, right? Machine learning, which is just a subset of a tool to employ artificial intelligence, is that the randomization is put in there by the algorithm developer. So these algorithms don't have to be random. They could produce the exact same thing with every prompt if they were configured to do so. They're trained on data set. You pick up, we'll step away from the art ones for a second and step into maybe the large language models, the generative.
Right, ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, those things, right? What they do is they take a starting point of information that they gobble up, poems and, people's letters and memos and all that stuff. And they train it up to a certain point and they stop there and say, this is all the data we're ever training on right here, right? And then you ask it a question and it goes back and it says, based on the way that you oriented your words together in your question, what is the optimal path that has always been chosen as people have navigated through those words, right? So
the relational positioning.
Yeah, the relation, like literally, like if you ever use the word the, then goat will 90% of the time will come after the word the. So I'm going to go find where I saw the and goat together and find out what the word that came after that was. And that's the one I'm going to give you, right? So that's kind of how it does.
Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, it does prediction. Right. Well,
goat, Tom Brady.
Yeah. But so the reason I'm saying that is that the randomization doesn't have to be there. The artists put it in there. They put something they call dithering. They'll put dithering in there just to give you a sense of creation, more creation that's in there. So it's very real. And let me paint you a picture, right, of using these algorithms for things outside of art, like compression. Let's say that, when you compress a JPEG image, right, it compresses down to a certain amount, not an image, a JPEG image, an image to JPEG, which is a lossy compression. You're cutting out portions of the picture to kind of make it smaller. And then when you get it on your computer, you spread it back up. It looks great because we have huge resolution now. But if you were to zoom in and zoom in and zoom in there, you start to get pixelation and fuzzy because you've cut some information out. Well, if instead I can make a prompt that will produce that exact same picture with just a string of words, I can send that prompt all the way across the world rather than have to send all of the bits of that image across the world. And as long as that algorithm is instantiated on both parts of the world, they can instantly reproduce the visual, right? So there are all sorts of applications here. In the application of art, I think that they have these companies that have produced them like Midjourney and thing, they've added this sense of dithering and randomization just as an to make it more interesting in the creative process. Now, I don't work on the Midjourney team, so I don't know, but they don't have to be random. They've chosen to do that with the algorithms that exist today. So I think if randomization is a key part of this, there's a very real possibility that you could get tools where you could turn that off, that switch off.
So if you can, to your point, yes, if you can eliminate the randomness, that does a lot to help the prompt author gain a copyright, if you will. But the post part of the selection, the collection, and arrangement, there needs to be, at least under current and long-standing copyright law here in the U.S., there needs to be somebody who is saying this, not that, and I will put this here, not there, and I will decide to use just this set, not this set over here, and there has to be a minimal amount of creativity. So assuming that you eliminate the randomness and you have somebody who's using the results of the prompt that was less random, and then they were taking it and they were affecting it in some ways, you may get closer to a copyrightable image, and you still can use the results of AI and get a copyright. But as I was explaining before, in the collage of of advertisements example that I made, the copyright is in the collected work of everything, not in the individual components. So if someone wants to use AI now, the best way to think about it right now is it's going to spit out a public domain thing to you. A public domain artifact, right? To sound like a sociologist, a public domain cultural artifact that you then, just like you would with the 19th century advertisement, got to do more stuff to in order to get a copyright. But if you can eliminate the randomness, as you were saying, Jason, then you may get closer to something that's like Photoshop. If I'm telling it, use these sorts of brush strokes and round out the shoulder more, then I do feel I'm getting closer to what I might have if I'm doing CGI modeling on a computer using primarily text prompts, which also happens. I mean, it's not all mouse. I mean, people.
Yeah, let me take it a step further, because I think that you're really helping to kind of refine this, right? And let me go into the music industry for a minute, because that's a form of art, right? So in electronic dance music, and by the way, I'm a metalhead big time, but I like all sides of music. But in the electronic industry, arpeggiators are huge. So an arpeggiator allows you to, rather than have to play the chord in a certain sequence of all the crazy notes that move really fast, you can just press the chord, and then the computer will pick a random sequence across all the notes in that chord. And we'll play it. And so what you'll get in the background underneath your song, you'll hear this kind of synthetic thing going crazy. And a lot of times what a lot of artists have done is they've not created that pattern. What they've done is they've just picked a chord progression, and then they've picked a random arpeggiator sequence to do it. Yeah. So there is I'll share my screen just so that we have something other than our faces to look at here just for a second. There's a metal band called Polyphia. This guy is an amazing guitarist. If you listen to this guy, he does a lot of workshops and things. And if you listen to this guy play and he just sits on a bench and he plays, you're thinking, how can a human hand ever do that? And I was kind of looking into him a little bit. I found he absolutely has that skill. But one of the ways he comes up with his music is he starts with an arpeggiator. So he will actually pick a chord progression. He'll play it in the computer and he'll let it move through the different arpeggiator randomized sequences until he finds one that he likes with his ear and his heart, his soul. And then he'll get the music on, he'll get that captured from the computer on screen, and then he'll translate it to the guitar, and he'll incorporate that arpeggiated sequence into his music, right? But I think the key is that he's taken that output from the computer and he has incorporated it into an arrangement with the drums, with the bass, with all of those things. So maybe we extend that concept to art, where maybe you take the output of a prompt and you use that, as kind of Justin was alluding to earlier, as one piece that you then pull 5 or 6 other things to arrange into a work of art. Is that copyrightable?
Yeah. So again, the collection of those things would be, and so I love that example. Let's stick with that example. So you have the arpeggiator, and I've never used them, but let's say you play a G chord. I just want to make sure I understand the tech. A G chord, which has a G, a B, and a D to make up the notes of that G chord, and then if I'm understanding, it will sort of go through random ways of organizing those notes to create something that sounds it's like it's within the G, the key of G, and then you use that. So that, let's say that was the arpeggiated sequence, right? Random sequence, it spits out a couple, you're like, I like sequence number 3. And you take that sequence of how it organized those chords. That sequence probably wouldn't be copyrightable, just playing right there. But the minute you put it into your, one track, and then you add another bass track on top of it, even if that's also an arpeggiated bass track, let's say, and the more you can take all of these things as public domain works and just put them together and the collected whole, you're going to have a copyright in. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't mean that you can stop somebody from going into your work, stripping out all of the others, all the other components, except for the arpeggiated work that is public domain, there's no copyright, and just using that arpeggiated work in their own work. So you have to, if what is key to people is they don't want people to go in and use the components that were created by AI, well, you're going to be out of luck there. Okay. But what you can protect is you can absolutely protect your collection, selection, arrangement of all of these public domain elements to something that are put together in the whole. So, there's a comic book that was the first AI comic book that they tried to get registered late last year. The Copyright Office said, no. But not because you couldn't get a copyright in that book. It's just that the copyright filer didn't say that it was only a copyright in the collected work, but they were trying to get copyright into some of the images and some of the other the elements themselves. So that case became sort of a big cause célèbre in the AI litigation, scene. Look, the Copyright Office rejected AI comic books. No, not quite. It just said you got to call it out. What is public domain? What is not? What is your copyright in the collected work?
Yeah. So one more question I want to throw to Justin, because I've been talking a lot, but and this is probably a really simple question, but I think it's important based on what we talk about. So is a copyrighted collection, is it legal to make it severable? Can you separate the components of a copyrighted collection and use them in your own work?
So give me an example. I want to make sure I understand. You're talking about a collage. You're talking about a collection of distinguishable individual works, or something that works together as a whole?
That's a really easy example. Like if somebody has taken a bunch of different works and made a collage. The collage is my copyrighted piece of art. It's in maybe it looks like a giant whale, and I've made it with pictures of clouds or something.
John Lennon.
Can someone take that individual picture of a cloud and yank it out of the middle of my whale and then use that in that work without having any repercussions on copyright law?
So are we talking about AI, or are we talking about just general copy? Because if it's AI, then the answer would likely be yes, because as we were saying, there's no copyright in just the instant results of the of the copyrighted of the AI algorithm. And what I mean by that is the first thing that comes out without you affecting it. But let's say it's not that. Let's say it's the individual photos that you drew and used, and everything is protectable. Then you're going to have to process it through fair use. And it may be if all you took was something that was this teeny, it's one of those mosaic works, as you said, Jason, of a whale, but the actual thumbnails that make it up are like 2 millimeters, square. Then a court may say, look, no one can even really see what that is. Yeah, you took it. Yeah, we have a documentation that you took it and used it in your work, but it may be considered de minimis, which means trifling, too little for the court to worry about. If it's larger than that, the court will say, okay, it's protected, you took it, and now we're going to have to deal with a fair use analysis of whether or not you are, you're allowed to take it and thus insulated from liability.
Okay, interesting. Thanks.
So for the last little bit that we have of the show, and by the way, this has been a super interesting discussion. Like I've loved every minute of it. It's been great. But for the last little bit of the show, I want to switch gears a little bit to sort of the moral quandary of AI art in the gaming industry. I know we've touched on it a little bit. We've talked about how it could have real impact on artists' lives and things like that. But do you think that AI art is going to have a more prevalent presence in the gaming industry? And how do you feel about that? Good or bad? I
think right now, creative industries are trying to get ahead of being blamed and sort of jumping out with very largely performative and maybe very heartfelt statements of how they approach AI. But it sometimes it feels a little like, okay, you're just saying that to be performative, and we will see how it shakes out. My guess, if I had to sort of peer into the crystal ball of how this would shake out over the next X amount of years, is I think, as Jason was saying, as we get more of these tools to affect the process of the AI itself and have more of artistic control on the results, then I think you're probably going to have publishing companies and gaming companies saying, hey, well, it's just a tool now. Before it was awful. Before it was the apocalypse. But now we're seeing, and look, I want to say, I don't like that result. I'm not advocating for that result. I think John Summerall is one of the greatest artists working today in this field. I love John, and I want to see the Johns of this world continue to succeed. And be recognized, because John's work is different from what comes out of an AI, and so is everybody who's creating. But I have to believe that for those companies that maybe gaming companies will be the last to do this, maybe they won't do it at all. But for those other companies that are the companies that are doing the web banner ads, and for the ones that are doing the local penny saver magazines and the local radio spots that need some music, the run of the mill, I don't care if it's copyrightable. I just got to get the marketing message out. That's where I think you're going to see this first impact, because they don't care about artists. They're not, you don't go and click on the web banner ad because you like the art, or rather care about the artist. So that's where we're going to see, I think, the most instant impact, in that sort of the everyday applied art, rather than in the more nuanced stuff. I'd like to think that gaming companies, which have historically liked, probably more than any other creative industry, if I'm being completely honest, certainly more than the film industry that takes ownership with both hands and says, F you to the writers, is a very respectful industry for creators. It's one of the reasons I love the industry. There's an acknowledgement of where we came from, and it's a very sort of fan, based culture. So I think that those social forces are going to keep some of that at bay for longer than in other industries. Film right now, the Writers Guild of America is on strike now, and one of the things they're striking about is dealing with AI and the recognition of AI in script. And it's not a doubt in my mind that if Hollywood thinks it can make money on something, to the artists, absolutely. I've been working, film and TV for over 30 years. That will happen. Minus some performative stuff in the beginning, justifying why it's actually a good thing that they're doing it. But I think the gaming industry is much more, and let me separate the tabletop gaming industry.
Right,
I think the video game, we're kind of sort of mixing our terms here, because it's gaming, but they're very different worlds. So if that's what we're talking about, the tabletop.
And I think the video gaming is much more aligned with the Hollywood style that you're talking about. If like those big, if a lot of those big video game developers could use AI, man, they'd do it in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah, so. and video is the next. We've been talking through this entire podcast about the graphic generators. Largely, we haven't really touched too much on ChatGPT, but video is the next one out of the gate. They already have examples of it. It doesn't look great, but it will in a few years. And I think what we're going to be looking at, the next step, and the thing to either worry about or cheer are going to be these massive suites, these connectivity suites, if you will. You're going to have a company like Adobe, which is going to say, okay, we're going to have an AI app that does the video and the graphics, and you can just sew it all together and in your master control suite, type of thing. And the part of me that likes tech just like you guys do is kind of I'm interested in playing with that stuff. I got to be honest, but but I'm not John. Right, I'm not John Sumrow. I don't have the ability to paint a picture like John. So I do also recognize that for me, it creates kind of a way to cut the line, if you will, Now I am a filmmaker and I've produced a lot of stuff. So to me, there's very little difference between telling a computer to do it and tell a cameraman to do it or a camera person to do it. But for somebody who's living is creating it with their hands, it does allow me a chance to jump past a certain degree of experience that I'm not sure is fair. And I think many people aren't going to really balance that ethics when it comes to their desire to get something out that they want to do. Yeah. So I think it's here to stay, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon your view.
Yeah, I think right now, especially, like if you look at what John does, right? He was the artist for that Cults of Chaos book that Chaosium put out. There is no way right now that you can have a generative AI like Midjourney produce consistent art throughout a book, right? Like
some row quality. We're going to label that some row quality art.
That's right. Exactly.
You're welcome, John.
And even just the same consistency of art, right? Like, because it may pull from different styles, and so like from page to page, if you were to use AI art, like it may feel like a completely different style, a different feel.
Right.
And one of the big things that we always talk about in our our review of products that we do, like we gush and gush about Free League Publishing, and like the One Ring, Aliens, Blade Runner. Like we look at their books that they have, and the art in them is just phenomenal. I mean, it just sucks you in. I mean, that's the first thing that grabs your attention, and then you get to the words, right? And because of that, I mean, it's so important. But I do think that there is very much a performative aspect that you saw with all the social media stands that people were taking. They're planting their banners and they're saying like, we will not do this. But I do think that they meant it, because I don't think that they could do it. I mean, I don't even think it's an option for them, which is partially why I think it is a little bit performative, because they can't just go to an AI thing and be like, okay, make all of our art from now on, because it would be a disaster in their products. Now, I think some of the small, like one-off like if I'm publishing like a one shot, and today I do a sci-fi one, tomorrow I do a fantasy one, the next day I do a lowbrow or a low fantasy medieval one, and the next day I do a post-apocalyptic one. Generating a cover piece for that using AI art, boom, I could slap it on there and put my thing out on DriveThruRPG for $1.99.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's great. It does what it does in terms of catch an eye, and I don't need any art in the middle because it's a 4-page document that, I'm just trying to sell for $2. I can see where they may use that. And usually that guy, I know I'm talking for a little bit here, but usually that guy that's trying to sell it for $1.99 on there, in all honesty, probably can't afford the Sumrose of the world.
Right.
Because they're just trying to put out like 2 RPGs a month, and they're selling them for $2, hoping someone's going to pick them up, and
they have this podcast called Tabletop and Beyond.
Right.
They're not making any money, and their wives are wondering why they keep doing it.
Exactly. They, but like they can't afford like a $500 cover art piece for this thing that they're going to be selling for $2. But now they could get on Midjourney and be like, hey, that's spacey enough for what I need, and let me put it on there and call it a day, right? So I wonder if there's some moral wiggle room here. You know what I mean? Where these guys aren't the guys that are sort of this little tiny cottage industry within the gaming industry. They aren't really, they're doing it because they like it rather than making a ton of money. Maybe they get a couple bucks here or there for it, but they're doing it because they like it, and they can't really afford, to do it unless they're coming out of pocket. Is there a moral difference between them saying like, okay, I'm going to use AI art, and like maybe a big company? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I do see that there's almost like 2 different tiers here.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent way to look at it. And quite frankly, the law doesn't really distinguish that way. It might be a very different place, and maybe even more fair if it did. But but it's not going to look at it that way, right? Just from a legal perspective, if you infringe, doesn't matter if you're a starving artist or if you're a multi-billion-dollar company. The tests are the same as to whether or not you're allowed to do that. What's relevant is the use that you put it to, and how much you took, and did you take the heart of the work, and did you compete with the other, with where you took it? Did you compete with that in the marketplace? And those tests are the tests of fair use. So from a moral place, not the legal place. You make what jokes you want about that distinction, but I think you are going to have that. That's the real world that will happen. Right. I mean, this is where my sort of the real world lawyering butts up against the law professor hat, because people are going to do what makes them money and gets their word out, and artists are going to art. Right. You're not going to stop an artist from arting. And because of that, you have to recognize that since that will happen, it's like you can have all the marijuana laws in the world. People are going to smoke dope. You can have all the anti-contraception laws. People are going to have sex. There are things that artists are going to do. They're always going to create, and they're going to use whatever they can to get it out there. So even though we may sit here and say it would be better if you didn't, I think it's a useless task to some degree to create this moral rule that will literally not be followed. So I think a better way to do it might be on the other end and say, have labeling requirements, even if they're only industry adopted, like AI was used to create this work, or no AI, GMO free, AI free, some little, little stickers like that. But it couldn't be, I don't think it could even be a legal requirement. It would have to be an industry adopted one, just like the Motion Picture Association of America, had the ratings. That's not a legal requirement that they have that. It's just that the motion picture, board was formed because they didn't want government involvement. We'll regulate it ourselves. So, so I think that's probably the likely splitting, the Solomonic, splitting the baby, that would have to happen. But it's not going away. Artists will use whatever they can, and especially starving artists are going to use whatever they can to make money. So, and I hate the fact that it's a fight of artist against artist, as opposed to, because that's just, the marginalized fighting the marginalized, as opposed to something, an onus on the tech companies or the publishing companies to say, AI was used, consumer, you make your choice. So that's where I would start, is sort of an industry level adoption of a standard of some kind of, to let the consumer decide whether they want that project. That'd be my take.
It'll be interesting to see if we get that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's a great recommendation, which is like, here it is. And it's almost like, this might be a terrible analogy, but it's almost like the warning labels on cigarettes. You know what I mean? Which is like, hey, these could kill you, and people are like, give me like 3 packs, I'm fine. So
yeah. I mean, and because people consume art in very different ways. As I said, applied art, you're gonna go, oh yeah, I like that look of that package, but you're not going to approach that the same way you would something you hang on your wall or you look in a book. So they're going to be different tiers of how people apply it. But I think the relevant thing, and just to kind of start buttoning out on my long-winded answer, is there's going to be a natural sort of halting of how far companies can take this if they don't have that copyright right in the AI results, right? So until that's worked out better, and a company can firmly and unswervingly know, hey, the artist who gave me that AI generated work, I don't have to worry that it's copyrighted. I know it's copyrighted. I own the copyright now, or I have a license to it. I don't have to worry about the gaming TSR, that's dating me, Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, suddenly, taking my work because I have it protected. So I think once we handle that, once people know that it is a bit of a minefield, if you don't know all of the ways that a human interacted with that AI art, you could end up acquiring something that does not have a copyright, and then you as the acquiring party are really out of luck. So I think that force also needs to be known, so the companies can make a concerted decision and say, hey, I need exclusivity on John Sumrow. You're getting the best PR in this podcast.
Right, absolutely.
We know that everybody identifies as John Sumrow's work. We won't be able to say it's a Sumrow on the cover, and we want to know we have the copyright to that, because we don't want to have to worry about who owns what, or somebody else coming in and using the same image.
Well, Thomas, this has been such an enlightening discussion. Honestly, like it's gone even better than I imagined.
Oh, thank you.
So if this conversation were in procedurally generated AI conversation, we must have put in the right prompts. Because I think it came out really well.
Well, I want to be Star Trek, not the mutant turtle or Mario. So if I could just.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I wanted to share, Jason. I don't know if you did yours, but I wanted to share my thing real quick.
Oh, share it. Yeah, let's see what it is.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah. Here it is. Here is my Mario
Star
Trek Incredible Hulk. So you've got Mario down here. You've got William Shatner face, I think, in a beefed out Star Trek uniform. So that's what mine did when I put those three. I put Super Mario, Incredible Hulk, Star Trek, and that's what I got right there.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Exactly. Did you get yours, Jason? Or
nah, I didn't save it.
No, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. So
I think yours looks better anyways.
Yeah. So anyway, but Thomas, thank you so much for being on the show. I learned so much from you, and I think that knowing the facts, understanding what copyright is, understanding what AI is, right? Understanding those two things leads us to better answer the moral questions behind it, which is like, what do we do with artists that are actually trying to apply their trade? What do we do with the industry? Because I think, unfortunately, all of those things get thrown into the stew pot and mixed around, and you just kind of don't know what you're getting right from it. And so this kind of light on the problem, I think, is educational. It's really interesting. And I hope our listeners got a lot from it as much as I did. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. For those who are listening, go check out Thomas Crowell's stuff. Yeah, thomascrowell.com. He's got the Pocket Lawyer for filmmakers. He's got the Pocket Lawyer for comic books that you can find on Amazon. Go to his webinar. Go check him out at New York Comic Con. Obviously, a very entertaining guy. I'm sure if you bought him a drink, he'll talk your ear off. So, I'm making promises for you, Thomas. So,
Well, thank you guys
so much again.
Well, thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. And again, I just have to say to those listeners too, these guys are asking the right questions. I've been on a lot of podcasts about AI recently. You guys have the right approach to understanding the issues. Too often it gets conflated, and I have to spend my time saying, no, that's not quite the issue. I didn't have to do that here. You got it. And so I'm glad there are people like you who are just promoting the complexity of it, because that gets lost all too often.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Yeah, had a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, everybody, if you love this episode, give us a like, smash that subscribe button, and give it a share. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on all of your major podcast platforms. And so we hope to hear from you again soon, and we'll see you at the tables. Have a great night, everybody.